So you would like to know how I made this. Well, you're in the right place. I'm Helen Miles and I'm here to teach you all the tips and tricks you need to make mosaics. So the mosaic I'm going to be talking about is something I made recently for my son who's leaving home. So he's finished university, he's got a new job, and he has kind of officially moved off into the world. So I wanted to make him something for his new flat, and something that would go through not just now, not just something that he will have in his room, but something that he could potentially and hopefully have for the rest of his life. So it's really important to me that it was also a mosaic that could be indoors or outdoors. You know, he might marry someone or be with someone who doesn't particularly like mosaic, so he could stick it in the back of the garden or something. Anyway, so I wanted it to be a very versatile mosaic and personal, but not too personal, because again, if it's something you're going to live with, you don't want to be kind of constantly reminded of your mother's messages within the mosaic. Let's start off by talking about the design. This is the design broadly that I came up with after digitally working on it using the software Procreate. The advantage, of course, of designing digitally is it means that you can endlessly play around with things, play around with the different elements of the design and move them around without it being a great deal of hassle. The disadvantage, of course, is that the colours are not particularly true to the real colours. So you can use a colour drop, a feature of the Procreate app, whereby you copy the actual colour of the tile and translate it into a digital form. But it's never particularly accurate. So that's one disadvantage. The other disadvantage is that you don't get the sense of tessellation, which of course completely changes the feel of the design. So designing online is only a useful tool at one stage of the design process, when you're still fiddling around with things and trying to work out how you want the balance to be. By the time I reached this stage in the design process, I was broadly happy with it. And as you can see, I was considering having a dark background. This beautiful, beautiful mosaic from the 1st century BC gives you an idea of why I was attracted to the concept of a dark background. When I was considering having a dark background, I made this sample. Now, making samples is not something I would generally do. It depends what I'm working on. But for this, I was allowing myself the time to explore and experiment because I wanted to get it right. And as I said, I really love the effect of dark backgrounds, but I didn't want to use deep black. So I chose this graphite in Winkleman's, and I really don't think it works. So it was very useful to make a sample. The reason it doesn't work is that the graphite and the fairly dark grout sucks all the life out of the glass. The glass is pretty vibrant. It's some really strong, bright colours there. But the graphite and the grout just kills that and deadens the effect. So I'm really glad that I made a sample because it showed me that I was going in the wrong direction. I made a second sample then. You're having a light background. Obviously there's some changes in the use of colours, but more or less I was using the same glass, and I haven't grouted this yet. But still, it gives me a good idea of how the colours are going to work with this lighter background. I gave my son the choice. I showed him both of these panels and he went emphatically for the light background. So that's what we decided on. Another reason why this dark colour didn't work is because there's no variation in it. It's completely flat. So the Romans, when they were making mosaics with dark backgrounds, had the advantage of using natural stone. So there's natural variations, there's kind of depth an interest in the stone, whereas this is ceramic and it has nothing. It's just monotone. And there are not similar colours. If I could mix the black, the pure black in Winckelmann's with other blackish colours, it would work potentially, but there aren't colours. There simply aren't available. They don't make them. So that's why I think the mixed background here is much more interesting. It has much more depth. It's visually much more appealing, and in a funny way is closer to the backgrounds of the Romans. Well, in fact, not particularly funny at all. It is closer because of the natural variation in the marble that they were using. Once I was satisfied with the digital version, I drew the design out in full onto paper. So at this stage, I'm sorry I can't get the whole thing under the camera, but at this stage I could then tweak the design and just finalize it. So even though I'd done a lot of the work at the digital level, I was still making amendments and checking the design once I drew it out. When it came to choosing colours, I spent quite a bit of time on this. In essence, it boils down to choosing colours that I really liked, and I obviously thought that they worked well in the piece. I was keen to use these Mexican glass tiles, which are supplied by Mosaic Workshop, partly because they're beautiful. They're flat on both sides, as opposed to the vitreous glass, which has ridges on one side and is flat on the other. They also have very vibrant, strong colours, which are quite unusual and stand out against the vitreous range. So that's why I chose these particular colours. Another advantage of choosing glass with ceramic, having the glass for the design and ceramic for the background, is it gives an extra layer of contrast to the work. Mosaics are bitty, they're fractured, they're busy, there's a lot going on, so you need a strong contrast in your work. And of course, having the shine of the glass just adds a different layer. It brings the glass forward as against the matte of the ceramic. Quick word on the ceramic. When I'm doing backgrounds, pale backgrounds like this one, I tend to use a mix of similar shades. So here we have white, super white, Ontario and pearl, which is this grey colour. And I'm using the ceramic randomly. So I tend to cut a whole lot of squares, mix them all up in a box and put them in the mosaic randomly. Although when I'm using I only used a spot or two of this grey, so I'll place that more carefully because I want it to be spaced around the mosaic and not in one particular area. When it came to choosing the board, the substrate, there was no real thought that went into it at all. This is Weddy board, which comes in different thicknesses, and this is Jacko board. So these are both compressed foam board that is used for lining bathrooms, and they're excellent for mosaics. And I've done other videos about using this board and how to prepare it for mosaic, so I won't go into that here. Once I'd cut the board and shaped it, I then applied the hanging fittings onto it. So again, I've done a separate video about the hanging fittings and a link will pop up now. So I'm not going to go into that, but just to show you what the hanging fittings are. But do pop over to the other video and watch that if you want to know more about putting them into the board. The other final thing to consider is the grout colour. So once again, I've done a separate video on grout colour. It's a very important subject and needs to be taken pretty seriously, because if you get the grout colour wrong, you can ruin hours, stroke days, stroke weeks of work. So really be careful when you're choosing your grout colour. This is a mosaic that I made previously where I've used my usual mid-grey. So the reason I'm showing it to you now is it's because it's using glass and ceramic, glass background, ceramic foreground. So the opposite of the mosaic that we've been talking about. But the mid-grey tones well with both the ceramic and the glass. So I think the mid-grey is almost certainly what I'm going to go for. Another thing to think about is the edging. You can either edge your piece, or I can either choose to edge my piece by covering the exposed foam board with tile adhesive, or I can use lead tape. So this is the tape. It comes in rolls like this, and it's sticky. Again, I've done a separate video on edging, including using this tape. So the thing about using lead tape is that you have to put it onto the exposed board. You can't cover the edge with grout or tile adhesive, preferably tile adhesive, and then put the sticky tape on it, because it just won't stick. So you apply the tape directly onto the exposed board. Then I copied the design onto the board simply by laying the paper on top of the board, which I'd cut to shape, and putting carbon paper underneath so that I could then trace the design onto the board, and away I went. Here's the mosaic now complete and ready for the next stage. As I said, I thought I'd finished the mosaic, but something about these leaves really bothers me. Well, I know what it is that bothers me. It's the colours. The colours are just not right. They're not strong enough for this kind of sweep of the twig, of the branch. So I'm going to change this colour to this. I haven't decided what to do here. I might make the whole thing this colour. So the glue I'm using is super strong, and it's never a good idea to take out pieces, especially if it's going to be an outdoor piece and it's going to have to withstand the elements over time. But when something really bothers you, there is no other alternative but to remove it. I have a selection of these tools. They're dental picks, and they're very, very cheap. You can buy them online in sets, and they're really totally perfect for lifting up stuck tiles. So I'm now going to do that so you can watch me doing it. That one came out so much more easily than they normally do. Believe me. Well, this is coming out too. Wow. I didn't want that to come out, obviously. And nor that one. So as you can see, I'm pulling away when you take pieces out which are glued onto this Jacko board, Weddy board. You also take out some of the skim, the surface of the board, which is a cement skim. So that means that the board is compromised, which is why I don't recommend that you do this. So I've done that, as you can see, and in fact I didn't use that colour, I used another colour, and in fact I tried various colours here, and it was only finally that I settled on this one. So with colour, it's often just what instinct tells you, what works in that particular place, and you might have an idea of what will work, and then when you actually do it, you realise it doesn't work. So I'm afraid it's, well, certainly with me, there's sometimes a bit of trial and error. Now it's time to grout, and this is the grout and the colour that I used. And here's the finished mosaic, grouted and ready to go down to London to my son. I hope that was helpful and gave you a good idea of how I made this mosaic. If you like this video and you'd like to see more, then please subscribe below.